Well, hello. We're back again for episode 2 of the Flyover League. What we've landed on as a name for this podcast. I am Jamie Plunkett. Here with me is self-proclaimed, if you believe the rumors on Twitter, self-proclaimed Big 12 shill Noah Darling is also here. Noah, how are you doing, my man?
I'm great. It's Groundhog Day for those who keep track of illustrious holidays. 6 more weeks of winter, he says, but like I tweeted this morning as well, I think 11 days. I'm not a mathematician. I actually failed geometry in high school. 11 days to opening day for college baseball. And I know we'll be in Arlington together to watch a couple SEC teams, I'm told, but as a Big 12 shill, I'm only seeing the Big 12 teams. I will close my eyes when the SEC teams are up to bat.
That's good. I mean, that's important to, really just focus on.
I'll watch the Big 12 pitchers throw the ball and then immediately shield my eyes from the SEC bats.
I wonder if there's some glasses we could customize to where you can flip it so on one half inning it'll block out all of the fielders and the other half will block out the hitter.
I know that a lot of major media outlets have that work against the Big 12. So there's certainly got to be that product that we can.
There must be. But yeah, this is episode 2 of the Flyover League. If you missed the first episode, I would highly encourage you to go back and take a listen. Noah and I talk a lot about what we're going to be doing with this episode, covering Big 12 baseball, a league that we both have a ton of respect for. And we also jump into some season previews. We talk about Arizona State, Baylor, and BYU in that first episode. So if you're a fan of one of those teams, especially, I would highly encourage you to go back and listen to episode 1 as well. Also going to do the podcast thing and say, if you are listening with your ears right now, which you are, because that's the only way we're distributing this podcast, go ahead and go to the app that you are currently listening on. Make sure you're following, leave a rating and a review. Tell us that we're great, because we really desperately need you to do that for our own fragile egos. But really, we're excited to be here, Noah. I think this is a fun first episode. I think it was well received, and now I'm excited to jump into the rest of the team previews with you, man.
Yeah, enjoyed the couple teams we went through. It feels like there's so much more of this league to discuss, and I know that you kind of outlined it a few weeks ago before we even started the first episode, and this one we're talking about every other team in the league, and with that, there's reasons to be excited about all of them, and I'm going to try to not convince everybody that every team is winning the national championship, but that might be hard.
Look, there are a couple teams on our list that we're going to cover tonight that have a lot of really fun potential. And there's some really good talent in the Big 12 this year. There are some teams that retained a lot of really good talent and brought in some really good talent, and we're going to get into all of it. There are a couple teams who are kind of in a hot seat situation. We'll talk about that as well. But the reality is that Big 12 baseball is in a pretty healthy spot right now, and we're not going to shy away from talking about that here. I will say as well, kind of as we get into the season, it's going to be really fun to see, all of these guys that we talked about in these previews, how they actually perform, because, to borrow from a national football podcaster, I don't think we'll ever be wrong, Noah. We'll just be let down by people who, don't perform up to standard.
Yeah. It is always the players and coaches' fault, and never our fault here in February.
That's right.
Making false expectations of players who have never, in some cases, performed at the Division I level. Not our fault at all.
This is true, and also people who are probably largely unaware of who we are and what we are saying about them. So, but we're still going to hold them to the promises we make on their behalf.
I like to think that the Flyover League is played in every locker room, not only in the Big 12 but in America, just for tidbits and hopefully all positive manners. But I think you'll find some bulletin board material if you listen closely enough.
This is true. I got on a phone call with a major airline provider this afternoon talking about getting the Flyover League in all flights. So if you ever fly Spirit Airlines, you're gonna hear the Flyover League. It's gonna be automatically broadcasted over the intercom. The pilot's just gonna hold his phone up to the intercom for the duration of the episode, and that's how you can consume this media product if you so desire. Okay, let's go ahead and jump on in, because we got a bunch of teams to cover. We got 75% of the league to cover tonight, Noah. This is a team that I think we're both pretty high on. The Cincinnati Bearcats is where we're going to start this thing. Jordan Bischel entering year 3 at the helm for Cincinnati, 230-win seasons in his first 2 years. That earned him a contract extension through 2031, which is a very fun thing. He's one of those names that started to come up when the carousel was getting rolling this offseason, and I'm sure despite the extension, his name will continue to come up in future off seasons as the carousel gets rolling, because he does seem to have the Bearcats rolling in a really good direction right now. But as you were previewing the Bearcats for the Diamond Report, which everyone should go and download, thediamondreport.com, what was it that stood out to you about Cincinnati?
I think that if you watched Cincinnati last year, you could draw the same conclusion that I didn't forget because it was kind of their identity, but I was reminded of when looking into this team that they stole. I'm not going to give you the exact figure, but I'm not going to dabble in hyperbole either. Like 150 bases. You might have that number in front of you, Jamie. This is a team that they get on base by drawing walks, laying down bunts, and then they get their guys over to third very quickly. They create chaos. They remind me a lot of Oklahoma's team that went to the national championship. That's kind of what their identity has become. And then they've got a lot of power too. They of course had the Big 12 Player of the Year last year. He is gone. I'm forgetting his name, which is pathetic of me. Such a great player he was. I can tell
Carrington
by
Cross?
Yes, Carrington Cross, tremendous player. He was really the lifeblood of the team, it felt like, but that caused me to kind of steer back and think, okay, maybe it's a reloading year for Cincinnati. But I'm fully in on the Bearcats. I think that they return just enough and bring in pieces that offer a certain amount of excitement. And Conlon Daniel, who had huge numbers at Wright State last year, and then Jackson Smith from Bradley are guys that I projected to slide in that lineup. Christian Mitchell is a guy that's a two-way player for them that is just pure electricity in everything he does. When he gets on base, he's going to be standing on third shortly. Jack Natilli, one of the best catchers in the country. I think he's pretty much a unanimous All-American, whether it's first, second, or third team from all the outlets that do that. Quentin Coates had a tremendous freshman season last year. Derek Pitts is very similar to Christian Mitchell in the sense that he is explosive. He gets on base. He's a problem. He does a little bit of everything. I'm really excited for his role to increase. And then I might mess this one up because we don't know him too well yet. Enzo Infelice, I think is how you pronounce that last name, is a guy that in my conversations with Cincinnati, I should have paid more attention to how you say his name, but it was hard to because of how they were selling him to me. They believe that he's going to be a National Freshman of the Year candidate, not just in the Big 12, but on a national stage. And at first I thought that's a catcher playing behind Jack Natilli. That sounds like a good candidate to maybe redshirt or be a breakout sophomore, but they believe that he's hard to keep off the field at potentially a DH a spot, and his bat is extremely playable right away. So just from an offensive perspective, I'm all in on Cincinnati to continue what they did last year. And then their pitching is just incredibly deep. I don't want to take anything away from you, Jamie, but Nate Taylor, one of the best arms in the league, if not the country. I think he's actually tremendously underrated in the love that he has not been getting in the preseason from those guys who have 3 or 4 All-American teams. And then you bring in Logan Knight and Dylan Schuyler from the mid-major levels. North Dakota State had a ton of players that transferred up a level. Knight's one of them. And then a ton of experience in that bullpen. And then there's a freshman that I should shout out as well. Chad Brown on the mound is somebody that they think is going to maybe even start as early as Saturday on opening day for them. And I think that if you're a Cincy fan who expected maybe a rebuilding year like I did as not a Cincy fan, rethink, because I think you're ready to win now.
And Nathan Taylor's one of those guys that if you just are a fan that looks at the opposing team's stats, or you're just kind of a stat watcher, you maybe aren't going to be as impressed with Taylor as folks who actually watched him pitch last year. He was so good across those 15 starts, 91 strikeouts, a sub 4 ERA. And by the way I calculate WAR over at base 12, he had the 15th best WAR in the Big 12 last year in a league that had a ton of really good pitching. And so, this is a guy that can absolutely be a frontline starter in the Big 12, should be in the conversation for pitcher of the year at the end of the year. And say by those same conversations, first team all Big 12 potential. I think he's got some like third team All-American potential as well. But this is a team really that, like you said, they stole 134 bases last year on 148 attempts, right? So not only was it volume, it was efficiency as well. And they're going to continue to do that this season, I believe, even though they did lose a couple guys. One guy that I'm really interested in is Christian Mitchell, just because he's been this two-way player for a couple of years, hasn't really seemed to get his footing in either direction fully. He's shown some really high level talent on the mound and at the plate. He's moving to left field this year, or sorry, making the move to third base from left field this year. I wonder if that maybe stabilizes him, giving him a new position, letting him kind of lock in, and then, I mean, he's got some really electric stuff if he can find the strike zone. I think he could kind of be the X factor for the Cincinnati team if he really steps into the guy they've hoped he could be, now that he's in his senior season.
Yeah, absolutely. He's electric, like I was saying. And when you have a two-way guy that was good at both levels, you almost don't want to make him specialize in one. But it's kind of like when you have a two-sport athlete coming out of high school. It just feels like they're better players at whichever they end up doing. And I think he has a chance to really, really break out. And I like what you said about an X factor. I know in the Diamond Report, the X factor that we kind of had to centralize our thought on was just best player, which isn't internally what I identify as the X factor every single time. So I really like that pick, and it feels like if he has a big year, if Derek Pitts takes that next level, if a guy like Cal Sefik, who's been around forever, is just able to do what he does, Cincinnati has a chance to be really, really good.
Looking at their schedule as well, 8 straight road games is not always fun for fans to see, but it's necessary if your school is located in Ohio this time of year. Um, but they've got weekends against Jacksonville State and UAB, a midweek game against Auburn mixed in there, and then they host Utah, Kansas, Baylor, West Virginia, and Texas Tech in Big 12 play. They hit the road against BYU, Oklahoma State, UCF, Houston, and Kansas State. So a couple really fun trips on the road there. I'm looking forward to that Oklahoma State weekend. And they missed TCU, Arizona, and Arizona State. So this is one of the few teams in the league that misses three of the teams that were tournament bound in 2025. They might be the only one. I'll have to go back and double check that. So they get kind of a break when it comes to conference play this year, and they get the tougher teams on their schedule at home. West Virginia coming to Cincinnati, Kansas coming to Cincinnati specifically. So I think it's a favorable schedule for Cincinnati to get maybe to that 34, 35 win mark. And then non-conference games against like Utah Valley, Miami of Ohio, that rivalry game with Xavier that they play every year. A really fun and favorable schedule for the Bearcats.
Yeah, and I like the way it sets up in conference play as well. You start out with BYU and Utah, which you think are pretty favorable. Of course, you never know what a team might look like when they actually play. And then you get Kansas at home for your third conference series. And that's a program that some teams have certainly struggled against the last 2 years as Kansas has found their footing in the league. But Cincinnati's not one of them. They've had a lot of success against the Jayhawks and took 2 or 3 from them in a very explosive series just this last year. And then you get Oklahoma State, who, like I alluded to, and we'll get into a little bit later, may be having an identity crisis early in the year on just who's playing what. They have so much youth. What are they going to look like early on? A Baylor program who might also be in that boat a little bit, trying to figure out their identity. So I think you start off with a chance to feel good about winning at least 4 of your first 5 series, 3 safely, but I think you can sneak a 4th one in there if you are doing what you did last year for a Cincinnati offense, supporting that pitching staff. Things get tougher, I would argue, a little bit later on, just depending on what UCF looks like. West Virginia is a good program. At K-State, will be tough. I know I have that series penciled in on my schedule, I guess. And then Texas Tech to end the year. I think that I said it with some of the teams we talked about last week. There are certain teams that you want to catch early. I don't think Texas Tech is. I think Texas Tech is one of them. I don't know if you want to play Texas Tech at the end of the year. That feels like if you're going to bet on Tech to figure out pitching, it's probably going to happen later than sooner. I'd rather play them earlier. But overall, like you said, they avoid some of the big dogs, and that plays really well.
Moving on to the Houston Cougars. This is one of those teams where it feels like it's kind of a make or break year for Todd Whitting. A couple rough years and back-to-back seasons in the Big 12. They did manage to get over 500 last year at 28 and 27, but not very successful in Big 12 play. Struggled, both on the mound and in the lineup with some inconsistencies over the course of the season. I think they addressed some of their biggest needs in the transfer portal. Um, but it's a situation where that's not necessarily the position you want to be in if you're Todd Whitting right now, trying to get the ship righted and righted pretty quickly. They do return a decent amount of talent both on the mound. Specifically, Richie Roman is a guy that stands out. 7 consecutive saves to open the season last year before they moved him into the weekend rotation, where he wasn't quite as successful. And then some guys on the field as well, just position players: Xavier Perez, Trey Broussard, Cade Clemmy is a guy who I think could be a first team All Big 12 caliber guy. Trey Broussard as well, a fantastic center fielder. The top end talent is there. I'm curious about the depth, and I'm curious about how these pieces all fit together and how quickly they can figure it out.
Yeah, like you said, a make or break year for Houston. I think so much of their season last year was defined by Antoine John, who won the Big 12 Pitcher of the Year last year, where he really did a lot of covering up some blemishes of this team. They netted a positive record last year, but it almost didn't feel like it. I'm impressed with what they returned. You mentioned some of the guys: Kate Clemmy, Tyler Cox, Trey Broussard, Xavier Perez. That's a solid core, I think, in the middle of the lineup. Somebody I'm excited about that's a newcomer offensively is Easton Winfield. He didn't do much at Texas last year. If just based on looking into the narrative a little bit, he just lost his footing a little bit, never really carved out a role in that Longhorn lineup. But he was tremendous at Louisiana Monroe 2 years ago. If you and it can be an if when you have a guy fail a little bit at an SEC school, but then excel at Louisiana Monroe. If you can kind of find the average in that, he can be a really, really solid piece. And I know that random tidbit that you're going to roll your eyes with your journalism degree here. On the Houston website, they have fun tidbits about all the players, and I'm pretty sure it says Easton Winfield's afraid of snakes or spiders, one or the others. I just immediately related to him when I saw that, and they have tidbits like that for all the Houston players, but I especially took note of his fear of one of those two. My fear for Houston is, where does the pitching on the mound come, or consistency on the mound, I should say. It's great how much they have returning. Ton of guys, ton of innings, juniors, seniors, a lot of veteran experience. But with returning, you also bring back the stats from last year, which weren't great. You mentioned some of the guys coming back. Richie Roman is somebody that people are saying that he might slide into a Friday night role. I don't know if he has that in him. I kind of just threw him in the bullpen because it feels like that's where he was better, like you alluded to. I like Paul Schmitz as a senior a little bit. Alex Solis is a guy that feels like an X factor on the mound as well. But I'm more in on the Houston offense than I am the Houston pitching, even though the Houston pitching might be a little bit more experienced but not polished. Feels like a team that's going to be in a better position than they were last year, but I don't think they're going to be excelling in the Big 12 like some of these other programs are. Like I might sell you that they might. I'm just not sold on Houston that much.
Yeah, it's interesting because they're going to end up being reliant on guys who just haven't produced at the Power 4 level before. You mentioned Easton Winfield. I think he's a guy that could have kind of a rebound year. It's hard when you don't get consistent playing time and you're used to that to kind of stay mentally ready all the time. So I'll be curious, like you, to see how he does for Houston this year. I think he could be a candidate to be a pretty good contributor for them. A couple arms, though, that I'm curious to see about. Northwestern State's Tyler Bryant, not a big strikeout guy. He only struck out 53 across 73 innings of work last year, but he's a guy that can eat innings for you. And when you're in a situation like Houston might find itself at times this year, just getting a guy who can go get you consistent innings and kind of keep you in ball games until the offense can do something. I think Tyler Bryant's going to be a pretty big piece of this pitching staff this year, whether he ends up as a starter maybe in the midweek or kind of a long reliever out of the bullpen. And then Ole Miss transfer Ryan Rodriguez is another one who doesn't, not an innings eater, right? He only threw 29 innings over the last 2 seasons for Ole Miss, 31 strikeouts, fills up the zone quite a bit. But how much can you get from him, I guess, is the question if he's averaging about 10 and a half innings per season. And then Chris Cinta is another kid who has been with Houston for a couple of years now, mostly worked out of the bullpen, but really needs to kind of take a big step forward as a senior in order for Houston to improve the way they want to. So it's a lot of question marks, really, especially on the pitching side, like you've mentioned. But I think the talent is there for them to improve. It's just when you're relying on that many guys to take a step forward, it can be a challenge.
Yeah, I think we saw the program build a little bit of momentum in Arlington in that Big 12 tournament. They played well. I think it was Kansas State that they kind of just had their way with, and then I believe it was TCU who they were competitive with in their second game before falling short. But I think that the program saw that excitement and a little bit of the talent that they have that's obvious, and that's why Todd got another year down there. But I don't know if this is the answer, and I know you're a big schedule guy. I don't necessarily love the schedule that Houston has to go through either.
No, definitely not. It's one of the harder schedules that you'll see. They host Utah, Kansas, Baylor, West Virginia, and Texas Tech. So it's nice they get two of those in-state quote unquote rivals at home. But then they have to go to Oklahoma State. They have to go. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong one right now. Who is this? This is Cincinnati. Get me out of here. Go back to Houston. Let's look at this now. This is right. This is much harder. They host Kansas State, Baylor, BYU, Cincinnati, and Arizona State. And then they have to hit this is a brutal road slate.
Yes.
A brutal road slate. They have to go to Kansas, to West Virginia, to TCU, Texas Tech, and Arizona. That feels not fair, frankly. That is, you're facing the regular season champ, the Big 12 tournament champ, the team that lost in the Big 12 tournament championship, and 4 of those 5 teams were in the NCAA tournament last year. That's tough. And I mean, it's not like their non-conference schedule is very easy. I mean, they go to Puerto Rico to open the season. They'll play Wake Forest, Boston College, Manhattan, and Washington there. You hope to take maybe 2 of those 4. And then they're in the Frisco Classic against Oregon State, Iowa, and Alabama 2 weekends later. I mean, this is not an easy road to hoe for Houston in a year where Todd Whitting really needs to get some wins in the win column.
And if you even want to look into the weather, like I do as a Midwestern football fan, I think, gosh, I hope I get TCU here in December. You got Houston going to Kansas in March, which is not when you probably want to go to the Sunflower State. And then you go at Arizona in May, which is probably not when you want to go to Arizona. So even those little wrinkles are something that stand out to me as a team that might be potentially frustrated with the direction that the program's going, now having to deal with the frustration of it being cold or blistering hot. Every little thing can add up, and that's something that drew my eyeballs as well.
And I mean, you also look at, a lot of teams use midweek games to kind of build up just the wins a little bit, help the RPI a little bit. And now Houston has Texas and Texas A&M. They've got a Rice that's rebuilding. Sam Houston State. I mean, Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns are always a tough out. Like, this is McNeese. I mean, it's any way you cut it, this is a really hard schedule for Houston. And I think it's just going to make, even if they do, I said this about BYU last episode as well, even if they do make marginal improvements, I don't know that we'll necessarily see that in the record at the end of the season, just because of how challenging the schedule is.
Yeah, I agree with that. And looking at another midweek opponent of theirs, I don't know if you mentioned Rice, but David Pierce, now the head coach at Rice. It's just that much more personal for the guy who's on a little bit of a revenge tour against teams in the area. I like that wrinkle as well.
I mean, 5 minutes down the road from each other, too. Yeah. He's going to have those boys fired up to play that game. And Rice, I mean, historically, for those in the state and for college baseball fans in general, I mean, that used to really be a destination program. And while in the new era of college athletics, it might not ever get all the way back to that again, I think that there's an opportunity under Pierce for them to start to rise as well. But this is not a Rice podcast. This is a Big 12 podcast. So
I do have a Rice hat, and I have no business having such a thing.
There you go.
So I'm in on the Owls.
Just can't lose to food. That's kind of the key rule. I do on a weekly basis, but baseball teams don't need to. Let's move on to the Kansas Jayhawks, a team that you know incredibly well. What a year last year. 43 wins, tied the second most in a single season in program history. That matched their 2006 season when they earned their lone Big 12 tournament championship. Dan Fitzgerald gets a contract extension, 6 years, but it starts in 2025, so it's really only through 2031. But his base pay in 2026, $675,000, rises all the way up to over $820,000 by the final year of the contract. Well worth it, I think, if you're Kansas, to invest. And it's an interesting situation in Kansas. And I'm going to let you talk about the roster as long as you want here. But I just want to say, when you look at Kansas as a university and you understand that it is historically a basketball program first, and then they've gotten a little bit of taste of what it's like to be successful in football, you think, okay, well, all of that money that they have athletically is going to go to football and basketball because those are the two sports that you really need to sustain for Kansas. And that yet they've clearly been investing both in the coaching side and the infrastructure side and in the NIL side with baseball, with Fitz's contract, with the way he's been able to recruit coaches to the university, with the guys that he's been able to bring and develop and then retain for the most part has been really impressive. And then something that we've talked about offline before, just the ability to do so consistently with JUCO talent is something that I think is really impressive for the Jayhawks. Obviously, they've got a guy who's a potential Big 12 Player of the Year, All-American style caliber player who's a JUCO development guy for Fitz that I know you're going to talk about. But this is a team that I think is very much trending in the right direction. My biggest question for Kansas is how repeatable is the JUCO strategy year over year? Because they had 27 new faces last year. I think they have 28 new faces this year. Can you sustain the culture? Can you continue to develop? Those are kind of the big questions for me heading into 2026 with Kansas.
You hit a lot of the bullet points on the head from just the state of the program. It was kind of ironic the way you let it off, as you know this program well. With the way they build the roster, actually, I don't think anybody knows this program well. I went to their first, or actually both their fall ball scrimmages, and it's literally like watching a brand new team minus a few players. You alluded to Brady Ballinger, I should say, who is earning all kinds of notoriety, which is great to see. But he's a guy who started the JUCO level, like you said, out of Nevada. Daryl Osorio is getting a little bit of that love as a returnee joining him. Another guy that started the JUCO level. And then everybody else, minus Jordan Bach, comes directly from the JUCO level, along with Max Solis, that I see as a potential starter. And Solis is a guy that's been all over baseball for many years, played at, or I should say was at Arkansas. I don't know how much he played, but began his career at Arkansas, has been at Kansas for 2 years now, was in the portal for about 10 minutes, and then decided to stay at Kansas. I think they were able to sell him a little bit on what his role might be, and he had a great fall for them, just hitting the ball. You thought maybe he'll be the catcher, but Augusto Mungarieta, who I'm going to have a lot of trouble saying that name for the first few weeks of the year. I have the advantage of seeing him in October twice now, so I think I can say it a little bit. Had a really, really strong fall for them as well. And I think I said it last week, two things last week, that if there's a program in college baseball that's the Indiana Hoosiers of football, it's probably Kansas, just because they take 24, 25-year-olds and ask them to go play baseball for another year together and kind of do it as almost like guys at the Sandlot, like, do you have it in you one more year? And let's not hit it over the fence because this is the only ball we got left. It's a bunch of guys that have played years and years of baseball, and you hope that they can bring that and beat freshman, sophomore pitching with it. And last year it worked tremendously. When talking to Fitz last year and just post-game press conferences, and especially towards the end of the year, I know it was one of the last questions I asked him. You could talk about replacing stats and bringing guys in to fill positions on the field, but the personality of last year's team was, I think, really how they really made money in the way that they just gelled together immediately. I know Don Vagley was telling me about that last January, where this team just feels so cohesive already, so much more so than the year before. And he didn't mean that in a knock on the team that he was a freshman on. It was just how great that group came together. That's easier said than done when you replace more than half the roster, more than 75% of the roster, what appears to be a year-to-year basis at this point with the way they've invested the program. I know that last year they were asking me early on, what do you think of Kansas State? And I say, well, it looks like they got a lot of great freshmen. And their question was, freshmen, what's that? So I thought that was intriguing. They do have a freshman I like this year on the mound in Sawyer Cooney a little bit, but that's kind of a dart throw out of the bullpen. Don Vagley's back. If you're a Big 12 baseball fan, you're like, how is this guy still in college, let alone a junior? That's what happens when you start immediately as a freshman. Mason Cook is a guy that if you have not heard of, you will shortly. He's going to be penciled in on Saturdays and looked really, really good in the fall as well. Kanan Carr and Manning West were kind of that Sunday guy behind Cooper Moore on Saturdays last year, who transferred to LSU. He was really their only loss via the portal. They lost a ton of guys to just running out of years to play college baseball. Like Jackson Hauge is a player that I think really college baseball would love to saw off their arm to give one more year to. He was just so much fun last year and battled injuries throughout his career, but he's gone now, so we can't talk about him anymore. But what a story he was. Uh, Brady Ballinger, like I alluded to, is a tremendous player. He's moving it to the outfield at least half the time, I'm told, to make room for a guy named Josh Dykoff, who I project as maybe the Big 12 newcomer of the year, the way that he has the ability to play both on the mound and in the field. And then a guy I really was impressed with was Jordan Bach. It helps when I hear some buzz about him and then I show up to the ballpark against Bradley and he hits a leadoff home run. And then he was just hitting the ball all over the place. And when you hustle in a fall scrimmage, that speaks volumes to me. My understanding is that's a big part of the program. You hustle at every chance you get. Coach calls you over, you're running to him. I'm sure that's pretty common, but I know that's something I've heard before coming out of this program. So I'm all bought in on their ability. I've heard some whispers. I don't know what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say, but I know that the word Omaha has certainly been spoken in that locker room. Fitz told me he was going to tell me the team's expectations around Christmas time. I have not heard from him directly. It's another holiday, Groundhog Day. Maybe I check in. I would bet my life that he's listening to this right now. So Fitz, if you're listening, cold call me. I'll answer. Tell me the expectations for this team because I'm ready to put you guys in a super regional. You tell me if you're going farther.
Listen, man, I knew you were high on Kansas. The Omaha conversation has me fired up for the Jayhawks. I'll tell you this: you mentioned Josh Dykoff, the two-way player from Minnesota Crookston. You just spent a lot of time talking about JUCO kids, and now here's a D2 kid who is expected to have a huge role in both phases of the game as well. And he's a kid who, he pitched 175 innings over 3 seasons at Minnesota Crookston, struck out 163. He's a guy who hit the cover off the ball as well. Expected to, I don't know where exactly he's going to play. I don't know where you have him slotted in. I have him just listed as an infielder over at base 12. But this is a kid who, who better to learn from than a guy like Brady Ballinger about what it takes to play D1 baseball. And you've got just a list of guys who can come in and follow his lead in that regard. The Schlotterbeck brothers are two guys as well who I think are really interesting, both from Paris Junior College. Obviously, Dylan is the older brother, who is, I believe, he's the two-way player. Is that correct? No, Gavin is the two-way player. But Dylan earned JUCO All-American honors. He had 15 doubles and 12 home runs last year at Paris JC. His brother earned NJCAA two-way player of the year last year. He slashed 365, 451, 590 with 16 doubles and 9 home runs, and also had a pretty successful season on the mound as well. So those are two more, like the JUCO list runs deep and deep and deep. I think it's 25 total JUCO players added this offseason for Kansas. But this is the question, right? Like, can you develop consistently enough and at a high level enough to have the success you want to have year over year? It's a relatively favorable schedule, schedule talk. 11 straight road games to open the season. Again, Midwest weather is just abhorrent, and I'm thankful I live in Texas every day. Even though it was 30 degrees here today, it's fine. Hosting Houston, UCF, Utah, and Arizona and West Virginia in Big 12 play is fun, and the Arizona and West Virginia series both happen in May. So that's going to be some big-time May baseball in the Big 12. And then they hit the road against Tech, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and BYU. Missing Baylor, Arizona State, and TCU in conference play, although they will play the random midweek non-conference game against TCU the week Big 12 play starts. So a fun schedule, midweeks against Missouri, Nebraska, Wichita State. Really a favorable schedule, though, when you consider the caliber of non-conference play and who they host in Big 12 play.
Yeah, I think that there's some aggression to it with RPI manipulation, perhaps, when you play teams like Lamar, McNeese State early in the year. Those aren't tremendously easy, but if Lamar goes and beats Texas in the midweek, which they usually do every year, that's going to look good if you take care of business against them. Same for McNeese State out of the Southland, I'm pretty sure. That series at Minnesota is interesting. If you watched any of Kansas baseball, you've probably heard about them hitting 5 home runs at Minnesota last year. I'm certain they'll do that again because it's just so easy to do. That'll be at US Bank Stadium as well. And there's like a random off day in there. So they get to spend an extra day in Minnesota. That's fun. I was excited when they did or announced the TCU midweek because I know that you and I were privy to some rumors or whatever you want to call it about the Big 12 schedule. And we knew that Kansas and TCU were not expected to play each other. And then all of a sudden they whipped this little treat up for us. And I appreciate that. I love a good midweek. Kansas did do that with Arizona last year and got taken to the woodshed. And it was one of their few poor performances of the year. And you thought this is really humbling for this group. They really needed that was the spin. And now they get to host Arizona in a series and go at TCU as you go to at Texas Tech the week after or that same week. I like what they've done. I think the program is chomping at the bit to schedule higher leverage opponents. It feels like we're due for, if Kansas repeats what they did last year, again this year, we're due to see them in a bigger non-conference event. Maybe not quite Arlington yet, but maybe something like Round Rock, something in that level. I'd like to see them compete in that if the program continues this trajectory. But then, of course, it's kind of funny to talk about Kansas athletics and you think Kansas basketball and you don't think of them as like in the coaching carousel at all. But the reality is that programs are going to want your head coach if you're Kansas baseball and you're winning. There was that moment where Tennessee might have came calling if a few things had gone the right way, and that would have been unfortunate timing. But you got to think Dan Fitzgerald's got to be a prime candidate for this job, and that was the same day that they had played K-State in a scrimmage, and I'm sitting talking to Fitz, and his phone rings, and I'm thinking, is that Tennessee on the other line? And that's kind of a microcosm of winning in this day and age. So it's a give and take. But if they continue on this trajectory, the program has every chance to succeed because it sounds like they are investing, like you alluded to. It's not being neglected in any way.
It's really not. And I mean, with a guy like Fitz, similar to the Bishop conversation we had earlier, when you're winning at a program like Kansas, you're going to get phone calls. And especially when you have the resume that Fitz does, obviously the experience at LSU, he's got the SEC experience, and those schools are definitely going to come calling. But if you're Kansas, you also have to look at the investment that you're making and say, like, are we willing to pony up to keep him here? Because, baseball at Kansas, I think, can be a winner. And you don't know what the next guy is going to be able to do, even if you do have all of the right investment. So keeping the guy, keeping the guy who has already shown he can win 40 plus games there, I think should be a priority for the university, no matter how much his phone might be ringing in the future. All right, moving on to the Kansas State Wildcats, just down the road from Lawrence in Manhattan, Kansas, the Little Apple, as they call it. I think the 2025 season for Kansas State was an interesting one because it showed us two things. First of all, it showed us that if you don't have all your ducks in a row, you can lose on any given weekend in the Big 12. And it also showed us how far Kansas State has come as a program under Pete Hughes, because it felt like, it was the third straight 30-plus win season, second straight NCAA tournament appearance, and it felt like there were folks in Manhattan who were still a little disappointed at the end of the year, especially with how things ended in the NCAA tournament. But the reality is Pete Hughes got his 200th win there. That's the third program he's had 200-plus wins at, along with Boston College and Virginia Tech. And he's reloaded again. I mean, he got a lot of really good portal talent. They lost a couple key pieces, both on the mound and at the plate, but it just feels like Kansas State is in that cycle as a program where you can anticipate with pretty good confidence that they are going to be a top 6 team in the Big 12, and they're going to be in line for one of those 7-ish tournament bids every single year.
I 100% agree with the direction of the program. It feels like a lot of things changed, and there was, of course, momentum along the way, but a lot of things changed for the program when they were snubbed from the NCAA tournament. I think it was 2023, when it felt like they had a resume to not necessarily easily be in, but it felt like they were certainly on the right side of the bubble, and they were left out, and it shocked a lot of people. After that, you've seen Kansas State schedule aggressively, and I think it's helped in development of these guys. And I think Kansas State is wildly underrated in the national conversation right now. The way that they return such a dynamic offense, in my point of view, I don't understand why guys like D. Kennedy don't get more national love. And AJ Avasco had an incredible freshman year last year with seemingly so much untapped potential because you look at him and you think this guy's as raw as they come, and yet here he is slapping a double down the line. I'm excited to see how he develops not only as a player but as a leader. My understanding is he's almost silent in the dugout and things of that nature. But his dad actually DMs me every time he hits a home run, and I finally said, "Is AJ a quiet kid? I've never seen this guy even celebrate anything." And he says, "Just give him a year. He's going to open up, and he's going to be a tremendous leader in that locker room." So I'm excited to see what he looks like this year from both of those perspectives. And then a guy like Dante Lewis, another two-way player in this league, and he caught my eye immediately last year in a fall scrimmage before he'd ever played an official collegiate game, with just how athletic he is. He was making plays all over just in pregame warmups. He was diving for balls. Like, he really shouldn't be doing that in batting practice, but you've caught my eye. And another guy, Nick English, just returns a lot. Not a ton of ABs last year, but he's just a veteran player. Shane McGann, Mick, whatever you want to call it, from SEMO, is a guy that fills a perfect need for them in my eyes. Grant Gallagher from ETSU slides in at shortstop, and he was tremendous last year. His OPS was well over 1,100 points. And then Lincoln Sheffield is a possibly under one of the more underrated arms in the league. I don't think he's going to blow you away with anything he does, but he just does it the right way. He reminds me a lot of Frost they had last year, where he's just going to come out and deal. And Carson Leggett, for me, is maybe the biggest wild card in the league. He came out and pitched that same fall scrimmage that I replay in my head every week, it seems like, where it was like, this guy's still in college baseball from Louisville. He was so strong as a Cardinal, and then he was pretty strong against Kansas in that scrimmage, and then he was lost for the season with Tommy John. I'm excited to see what he looks like in what feels like his 8th year of college baseball. And if you're gonna have a guy like that, it helps that you're in the Sunflower State, where apparently being on the Social Security registry helps for playing baseball. I'm excited for what the Wildcats have this year. It feels like both programs in the state of Kansas are peaking in different ways, but the right time for really exciting baseball in the state in a rivalry that hasn't always been featuring great teams.
I remember being down in Houston for the Astros Classic when it was still the Shriners Classic, because TCU was playing down there. It was the year that, I can't remember who all was there, but Michigan was there, Louisville was there, and I remember watching Liggett's outing against Michigan, 7 innings, 7 strikeouts, just absolutely dominant. Talking to their head coach about him after the game and just the praise that he heaped on him. And now we're here in 2026, 3 years later, and he's still in college. Like you said, older dude, but this is kind of the roadmap to success in college baseball now, are those veteran guys who have been there, done that, and are capable of producing in big moments. Now, it's never easy coming off of Tommy John. It's never easy to recover. Every guy recovers differently. And, we saw that with another guy on Kansas State's roster last year, Cohen Feezer, who was with TCU. He had Tommy John, worked his way back last year, really kind of hit a wall midway through the season. Didn't have his best stuff, but, another year removed from surgery, could be a pretty productive arm for them. Can eat up some innings, even though his stuff isn't overwhelming, similar to what you said with Lincoln Sheffield. And then it's so funny to see some of these names that are incoming, because Micah Kendrick, for the TCU fans watching, is another former Horned Frog. He hit the JUCO route first before he got to Kansas State, but he's a kid who came into college with a ton of hype around him. The coaching staff was really excited at TCU to get him on campus, and just never could quite break into that infielder core, which is pretty hard to do when you've got guys like Anthony Silva playing shortstop for 3 years. But that's another kid who just adds valuable depth, has been in the Big 12 before, kind of knows what it takes to win games in the Big 12. And even if you've got voices that are mostly sitting on the bench, that's still really valuable, just from a perspective, a leadership perspective, for guys to get those guys on your roster. This is an interesting squad. I mean, when you lose Seth Dardar and Max Martin to the portal, that really stings, right? When you lose, I don't think they lost any pitching really to the portal that they were intent on keeping, but losing Dardar and Maximus, I think, was tough. But like you said, they still bring back a really good core. They brought in a bunch of extra talent, and Yeah, I'll be interested to see. They haven't finished in the top 4 in the Big 12 standings since like ever, I think. And so I'll be interested to see if they can kind of maybe take that next step this year in what feels like it's a pretty loaded Big 12. Um, but this is one of those teams that if you're not paying attention to Kansas State, they're going to reach up and get you on any given weekend. Schedule wise, they loaded up really with some of these invitationals that they're going to. The MLB Desert Invitational to open things up. They're playing Iowa, UConn, Penn State, and Air Force, leading straight into the weekend 2 in Arlington, where they'll play Auburn, Nebraska, and Michigan. And then they host Arizona State, TCU, Oklahoma State, Kansas, and Cincinnati. That's not an easy home slate, but you're glad when you look at their schedule. You're like, oh, we're really glad we got all those guys at home.
Yeah.
And then on the road, they travel to Houston, Utah, have to go on the road against Arizona and West Virginia, which is tough. And then they finish things off with UCF as well. Really tough schedule for Kansas State. But I think they've got the roster to go out and make some noise.
Yeah, and like I alluded to, that's what Pete Hughes does. I don't think he's done with, or I don't think he's ever going to return to a lighter schedule just because he saw what happens when you do that. I think that internally I had that thought with Kansas with how they scheduled last year, where if these guys go on a skid, I could see the committee not looking favorably upon their non-conference schedule last year. So I'm glad that Kansas State continues that almost tradition at this point. You don't see a lot of programs in 2 weekends of high major talent with the MLB Invitational and then going to Arlington. I'm glad that Kansas State does that, and that's where a lot of the team broke out last year. Was in Arlington. They struggled last year. If my memory serves, they were in Conway. I know that. I think they lost to Washington in Coastal Carolina, and then beat somebody small. And then they came out to Arlington and really exploded. And AJ Vasco really settled in very early on. I remember being impressed with him. I know TCU fans are scratching their heads against Kansas State last year a little bit, and that was the team you walked away from. Okay, Kansas State is back after being away for 1 weekend, and then they were kind of topsy turvy all year. But I think there's a lot of value in breaking out against good teams as opposed to breaking out against bad teams just for confidence.
Absolutely, yeah. They started 1-4 and then went 3-0 in Arlington, and you kind of turned your head and said, "Whoa, what just happened there?" I mean, and that Sunday win over TCU was like 10-2 or something. It was pretty convincing.
Yeah.
I know TCU fans were really disappointed in that game specifically, but I mean, it's got less to do with TCU and more to do with Kansas State, frankly.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to the Oklahoma State Cowboys. This was a really weird 2025 for Oklahoma State, a very abnormal season. Finished 30-25, 15-12 in league play. First time that they finished outside the top 4 in the Big 12 standings since 2017. It's just not something you see Oklahoma State do, is have a down year like this. Some of that was injury related. They lost a couple key guys in that infield. There were some pitching issues there early on as well. Obviously, just the chaos of the season, right? I mean, the wildfires in Oklahoma that canceled 2 of the 3 games against West Virginia, a couple other games canceled as well because of the fallout from some of that stuff. Really interesting 2025 season. They also lost their longtime pitching coach, Rob Walton, who chose to retire at the end of the year. So they go get Blake Hawksworth, the pitching coach from Oregon, who's done a really good job getting the most out of his arms, I would say, with the Ducks over the last couple seasons. And so you look at Oklahoma State and you see the guys that they're returning, some of the key transfers that they brought in, and you're like, oh, okay. It kind of feels like 2025 was just going to be a blip on the radar and that they're going to get right back to business again in 2026.
It feels like people underrate Josh Holiday and just how consistent Oklahoma State has been. When they have a year like last year, you say, oh, man, people who don't pay that much attention to the Big 12 or Oklahoma State might think, oh, I wonder if Josh Holiday's in the hot seat. The guy still made like 11 NCAA tournaments in a row, and they had a pedestrian year for a little bit, and then they really turned it around, I think, when they moved. Why am I so bad at remembering names year to year? Youngerman from the bullpen to the starting rotation really revolutionized their season in my eyes. He was so good at the bullpen, and then you thought, oh, I wonder if this is a mistake, but he was dynamite in the starting rotation as well. And as I remember, at least the feelings in my head, when they entered the Big 12 tournament, they weren't a favorite to win it, but you kind of thought they've got a path to win this thing. They had to go through Kansas in game 1, and you thought if they pull this off, they've got a nice path to maybe compete. And looking back now, they would have had to gone through TCU, so maybe it wasn't that easy. But there was excitement there with just the way they were playing, and then they took it out to Athens and nearly won that regional, running into a Duke team that really wanted to host a super regional for the first time ever. But looking at their lineup that they return, you alluded to all the returning talent, and it starts with Colin Brueggemann, who's just massive. When you see him in person, he's like a literal horse, and he I think has played something like 150 career college baseball games, pretty close to a full MLB season, and crushes the ball every time he swings. It feels like it just another your typical Oklahoma State hitter. They've had so many of those over the years, and then you get Brock Thompson back, who was really, really good as a freshman last year. I saw his stats, and I was almost disappointed that they weren't better because it felt like he really fell into his own, especially as the year went along. Aiden Miola and Avery Ortiz are back after being limited last year. They are really, really strong pieces of kind of consistency throughout their careers. And then Colin Ritchie is another fantastic leader who's been an all Big 12 guy throughout his career. And it feels like they're going to hit the ball really well. But my question with Oklahoma State is how are they going to integrate these freshmen? They have tremendous freshman talent, a lot of guys who turned down going pro to come play at Oklahoma State. Ezra Essex has been a really fun player to keep my eyes on because he's hit at least 2 inside the park home runs in fall scrimmages that fans were able to see. And if people are seeing that, I wonder what he's doing in practice. You can only assume he's hit 10, 20 inside the park home runs. It's not inconceivable. He just is very, very fast. Danny Wallace is another high-ranking freshman that I see making an immediate impact. And then they've got another guy whose name's escaping me. It's something like Enzo or something in that realm. If you can,
Remo
that would be it. Remo is
Domenico.
Another guy
how
from
we're going to say his last name.
Okay, from the another Midwest guy that is going to find a role in this Oklahoma State outfield. It looks like, and how they utilize them, what it looks like on opening day compared to maybe the middle of April or May in that starting lineup is something that really intrigues me about Oklahoma State. Because if there's any program that I see in a few years following the TCU path of let's get some exciting freshmen, play them right away, and have a really exciting sophomore class, it could be TCU or Oklahoma State next year. And then on the mound, you get Hunter Watkins back. Mario Pesca is a guy that could move up in that rotation. He was really good in the bullpen last year. And then you get a few impact transfers, Bryce LeBlanc, Hudson Barrett. And then TP Wentworth is somebody that excites me because if you find the field at Clemson in the ACC as a true freshman playing in a two-way role, I can only imagine what you're going to do at a place like Oklahoma State that appears to have openings in the rotation.
So clarify this for me with Hunter Watkins, because my understanding is he suffered an injury in the fall and is out for 2026.
Okay, that could be a twist of the night.
Let me double check that really quick. When you look at this pitching staff specifically, you know bringing in guys like Josiah Golden, who is a guy who was up to 97 this fall with his fastball, proven at the JUCO ranks, led Johnson County to a JUCO College World Series. You know that could be a pretty big piece of things here. But let me double check on this Hunter Watkins stuff because I don't want to lead you astray. But when I was reading,
I'm doing some digging myself.
Because the reality is that that can go a long way in either direction to helping dictate Oklahoma State's season. You know, you lose Bodendorf, you lose Youngerman, some of these other key arms last year. You're looking at Hunter Watkins kind of as the guy to be the Friday arm.
I'm seeing a tweet here from somebody I consider to be a close friend and sad Oklahoma State baseball sloth, who's saying that Hunter Watkins is probably out for the year with a torn ACL. But he's replying to a tweet that says, I feel like I haven't heard a thing about Oklahoma State baseball. Anyone have any updates? So
let's see here.
Might be an echo chamber situation. I am not seeing an official ruling.
I think based on what I was told, I think Hunter Watkins is going to be out for the season. And that's a really disappointing loss for the Cowboys. Yeah. It changes their rotation. It changes how they have to approach their entire pitching staff because you lose a guy who, as a sophomore, struck out 70 across 64 innings of work and really was in line to have a huge expanded role this season. I'm looking one more spot just to make sure I'm not a crazy person that's lying to you.
Well, I'm
But
seeing some smoke, so you at minimum didn't make it up. Somebody else made it up if it's not true. But
there
I'm
you go.
seeing this. I'm seeing the smoke.
We're just gonna go with if I'm wrong, it's because someone else was wrong first. But yeah, I do think Hunter Watkins is out for the season, and that's a huge blow. But I think that when you look at Josh Holiday, and like you mentioned at the top of talking about Oklahoma State, undervaluing and underrating his ability to put winning programs on the field. I think 2025 was a beautiful example of that with all the chaos that they experienced, still making it to the NCAA tournament and making a little bit of noise in that. I believe it was the Athens regional before they eventually lost in the regional final to Duke. Took down Georgia along the way, right? Like they had some real highlight moments, even in what we would all consider a down season for the Cowboys. So they've overcome injuries before. They've brought in new faces that have contributed right away before. There's no reason to believe that 2026 will be any different. That's not to say that losing Hunter Watkins doesn't matter, because it absolutely does in a tremendous way. But I don't know that it necessarily lowers their ceiling as much as it would for other programs in the same situation.
Yeah. The immediate spin zone I can think of is the last few years with Oklahoma State. Outside of Holiday last year, there weren't very many known commodities entering the pitching conversation with Oklahoma State. And 2 years ago, I was pretty shocked that group didn't make it to Omaha with the balanced lineup that they had. But that's kind of the curse of Oklahoma State baseball, is you actually don't want to host a regional, because that's when things go south.
Truly it is. Let's keep on rolling here with the next team on the list. That is the TCU Horned Frogs, co-favorites according to several gambling websites to win the Big 12 this year, along with Arizona at plus 400 each, I believe. I haven't looked too deeply, obviously. But this is a team that reached the tournament in 2025, had a very disappointing outing in the Corvallis Regional. I think there was some maybe hangover there from the expectation of hosting that went unmet. But this is a team that returns the bulk of its pitching talent outside of Luis Rodriguez, who's lost to the year with Tommy John's lost for the year to Tommy John. And then one of the more dynamic lineups that you're going to find. One of the best, as I wrote for Horned Frog Blitz earlier today, one of the best outfields, I think, in college baseball, up there with Georgia Tech and LSU and some of those others that you could probably list, Virginia. I think TCU has the talent to match those outfields. But this is a team with incredibly high expectations coming into 2026. Year 5 under Kirk Saarloos. He joked with me the other day that he can't believe it's already the fifth year that he's been at the helm of TCU, considering he has been on staff since 2013. But this is a coach who I think has started to really come into his own as a head coach, and understanding all the ins and outs of what it takes to be a top caliber head coach and have a high caliber baseball program. The expectations in the room are sky high. So it's funny to talk to some of these players and coaches about external expectations, and I can't imagine, especially for some teams like TCU, Arizona, West Virginia, these teams where it's like, yeah, they have high expectations, but our expectations for ourselves are higher. And I think TCU is definitely in that boat in 2026.
TCU has kind of become I don't know how to correctly metaphoricize it, the beacon of the Big 12, and if you're going to believe in the Big 12, it starts with TCU in 2026, and the sophomore class is just so strong, and with guys like Isaac Cadena, I wonder what happened with him. You might have the inside track. I wish he was back just to get me even more excited about this club. But Nolan Traeger, Chase Brunson is a guy that's been around forever. But again, focusing on the sophomore class, Soros Strauss-Snyder just leads the nation in terms of guys that just get talked about. I'm so excited to see him against Rock Chalowski in LA week 2. That was something that there was rumors about on Twitter that, I heard TCU's going to LA, and then some people were saying, yeah, it's to play Marymount, and that's like, no, let's go play UCLA. They're playing both. I'm excited to go watch that, and that was something that immediately caught my attention, because I love when top players play against top players, and you hope that neither of those players have a sophomore slump of any kind. But Tommy Lepore was just so strong last year, and he's another guy that I don't think gets enough love nationally. You'll see him appear maybe on third teams here and there, but just not enough first team love for a guy that was tremendous last year. I know he handled. It felt like the bigger the stage, the better he played, which wasn't necessarily a thing you expect out of a Wichita State transfer. And then Mason Brassfield feels like the guy that has to extend this rotation from Friday to Sunday. And the buzz that I've heard, I always feel silly saying that to a TCU guy, is that it sounds like he's going to be able to live up to that potential. I'm curious about how Noah Franco develops on the mound. He was really strong as a DH offensive factor last year. I want to see him pitch a little bit more. I know he did in that scrimmage against A&M. I don't know how well he pitched. I'm curious what his role is going to look like. I wouldn't be surprised, just again from an outsider, Jamie. You're the insider here. If he became a more bat focused guy, I wouldn't be surprised if he became a midweek reliever and less. But I really like this bullpen, so I don't think they need him in that role with K Duty and or however you say it and Nate Stern. Those two guys feel like a dynamic 1-2 punch that are going to be able to compete for Stopper of the Years if they reach that potential.
Yeah, so a couple of notes there. Brassfield added a sinker this offseason. I think that's really going to help contribute to him being able to pitch deeper into games because he was really just kind of fastball changeup at times last year, a little bit of a slider here and there. But that sinker is a dynamic third pitch. He's worked really hard on it this offseason, so I think that's going to be good for him. You talk about Tommy Lepore. I mean, every time I talk to, it's funny that you mentioned Wichita State because obviously the Wichita State transfer that TCU folks talk about is Peyton Tolley. And he came down from Wichita State, wore number 47, was incredible on the mound for a year, and then went and obviously did what he did with the Red Sox organization this past season. He did not play with Tommy Lepore at Wichita State, but the two of them did talk the offseason before Lepore transferred to TCU about the Horned Frogs, and Tolley really was what sold Lepore on TCU. He gets to Fort Worth, wears the same number as Peyton Tolley, touching 100 with his fastball like Tolley, and pitching really, really big in some big moments, just like Peyton Tolley did. Now, in year two, the expectation for him, coming from Tommy Lepore himself, is how much stronger can you get mentally on the mound? Because there were definitely some moments where he got a little bit too high, got a little bit too low, started to lose some command of that fastball, and really just couldn't quite reel it back in the way he needed to at times. So he spent most of his offseason really working on the mental side of his game. Added, he's another kid who messed with the sinker as well. I don't know how much he's actually going to use it this offseason or this season. When you've got a fastball like his and a cutter changeup mix, you don't really need to mess with much else. But he's a guy that is, high caliber front end of the rotation. And if things work out well for him this year, he could be a top 2, top 3 round draft pick come summertime. You mentioned Noah Franco. Kirk Sarlos put it to me this way last week that Noah Franco is a position player that also pitches. And so you're right in your assumption that, playing in left field, being a dynamic hitter in the middle of that order is really going to be the priority for Noah Franco. I wouldn't suggest that he's going to pitch any less than he did as a freshman, but I wouldn't be shocked if he didn't pitch much more than he did as a freshman. The goal for him when he is on the mound is to keep it simple and throw strikes. He's got a great fastball. He's got a really good slider that got stronger as the year went on. If you can go give TCU 1 2/3 innings a week of throwing, just filling up the zone, getting strikeouts, doing your job, and then the rest of the time you're swinging a heavy bat from the left side of the plate in the middle of that lineup, I think that's going to be a great sophomore campaign for Noah Franco. Closing out this weekend rotation, it was down to Trevor Baumler and Lance Davis in the fall. I would give the edge to Lance Davis right now, the Arkansas transfer who redshirted in Fayetteville last year. He added a little bit of velo to his fastball, was really good in scrimmages pretty much throughout the fall. Looked great against Texas A&M in that exhibition game as well. And so I think I would give him the edge right now for being the Sunday guy. But that means you've got a guy like Trevor Baumler who's probably going to be your midweek starter. And he's another sophomore in this really impressive sophomore class that I think has a lot of value and can be a really productive arm for TCU. And then you mentioned Udy and Stern in the bullpen. They got some more reinforcements as well with Walter Quinn from Grand Canyon and Tanner Seguspie from Cal Poly, both of whom have closer experience. And so you've got a bunch of arms in this bullpen now that Sartlos can go to at any given situation and trust to get out of it, to get outs. And so those are four arms I think in the bullpen that TCU is really going to rely on. Um, then at the plate, Rob Liddington had a really good fall. He's the incarnate word transfer, hit 15 home runs, was the Southland Player of the Year last year. Um, he's a guy who's going to man first base to do his thing at first base. If you can get 10 home runs and three or fewer errors from Rob Liddington at first base, that's a really productive season. Trying to think who else without talking too much here. There's another Franco on the roster now, Lucas Franco, not related to Noah, who is in line, I think, to get some starts at shortstop this year. TCU has this history of bringing in really young infielders and letting them produce right away. Braden Taylor at third base, Anthony Silva at shortstop, Ryder Robinson for a year before he transferred to BYU. And I think Lucas Franco is kind of the next in that line of young guys that are going to get playing time right away. Stroh is obviously another one as well in the outfield. But Franco missed most of the fall with an injury. Has got back by the end of fall camp, has had a really productive spring so far, and has really leaned on Cole Kramer to help slow the game down. It's always good to have, a 23, 24-year-old guy in your infield to help the young guys out. And Cole Kramer has been doing that. So Lucas Franco's another guy to watch. And then Jack Bell, just one of the best defensive infielders in the Big 12 last year at third base, is primed and ready to be in that spot again this season. So this is a year where, you just look at TCU's roster and yeah, it's reduced down. They're down to the 34. A lot of the Big 12 rosters aren't quite yet. And really they're at 33 when you consider the Rodriguez injury. But there's not a lot of drop off in talent when you get to like the 20 to 30 range of this TCU roster. I think they've constructed it really, really well. They've got the top end talent to compete with the best teams in the country. I think they have the potential to be one of the best teams in the country. And now it feels like, Kirk Saarloos, you've got all the pieces. Now let's go see what you can do in year 5 as a head coach.
A guy that you didn't touch on, which I hope is oversight and not for a reason that I don't know about, Brady Dallimore. I'm curious about his impact as a freshman this season.
He's a guy that is going to take some of those starts when Nolan Traeger needs a break behind the plate. I think he's a guy that could also give Liddington some reprieve at first base if they really needed him to. But this is when you start to talk about Brady Dallimore, you get into the question of what are you really going to do with Noah Franco? Because last year, Noah Franco occupied the designated hitter spot. He was great in that role. He could come in and pitch without disrupting the lineup too much. But in 2026, you're looking at Franco as maybe being your primary left fielder. And if that's the case, that DH spot opens up for a guy like Dallimore to get some swings. He had a great fall. I thought he was really impressive. Swung a heavy bat. He hit the ball as hard as anybody did in the fall for TCU. I think there were some struggles behind the plate defensively that he's still developing. Reminded you that he's a freshman, but if you can slide him in to that DH role, get him some experience, get him some swings, I think that would be great for his development and for the team overall. It's just a matter of what you do with Franco, because if you don't want Franco in left field, then he's going to have to occupy the DH spot. That means Jack Arthur is probably going to be out there in left field, who's another guy who's produced well in limited time at TCU. But this is kind of what I'm saying. When you get to the 20 to 30 guys on the roster, you can see the puzzle fitting together in a couple different ways, and the potential is there kind of any way you cut it.
Yeah, not to compare our, biggest sources of intel too much, but I believe that the Kansas Jayhawks are experimenting in similar ways with Brady Ballinger, moving him to the outfield to move Josh Dykoff to first base, and it just changes the infield with the way you can move guys around. Where does Dariel Osoria end up, whether it's second or center field? And I can see the vision with TCU as well. And TCU, you're hoping to move a puzzle piece to win a national championship. Kansas, you're hoping to move a puzzle piece to just move the program in the right direction. But I'm excited to see from our perspectives how those two programs, the ones we keep our eyes on the most, change in the league as we try and watch the whole conference at the same time.
Yeah, and really it just comes down to, what kind of athletes are you recruiting, right? Like the fact that Fitz has the opportunity to move Ballinger to the outfield is a testament to the kind of athlete that Ballinger is. And same thing with Franco and Dallimore at TCU. The fact that you can move them around is because of the kind of athletes that they are. And you see that with top programs across the country. And you're seeing that more and more in the Big 12, right? Arizona, We're going to talk about some guys at West Virginia who have that ability as well. Cincinnati has some of those guys in their back pocket. If you were recruiting really good athletes, that opens the door for a lot of different possibilities, and I think that raises the ceiling of the program when you do that.
Absolutely.
Let's keep on rolling down the road to Lubbock, Texas. The Texas Tech Red Raiders are the next team on our list. Another interesting program. I don't know that it's necessarily the same kind of hot seat territory that Houston would be, but there's definitely got to be a little bit of dissatisfaction from the Texas Tech fan base when you consider the overall picture of Texas Tech athletics right now.
Yeah.
With the way the football team is rolling, making it to the college football playoff, the very clear investment there, the very clear investment in men's basketball, the clear investment in women's basketball and softball as well. From top to bottom, Texas Tech is not shy about the money that they are spending on athletics. And yet there's some inconsistencies with the baseball team, especially when you look at the guys that have transferred out of the program the last few years, that lead you to wonder what the investment is really like for their baseball program right now. And I know that everybody likes to talk about the Tim Tadlock lifetime contract. I think there were some terms added to that this offseason or maybe two off seasons ago that kind of restrict that lifetime clause a little bit more. And I'll be interested to see for the Red Raiders because they bring a bunch of production back, or they bring in a good amount of production at the plate. They return a lot of production at the plate. Pitching is always going to be the question when you're playing at that ballpark for the majority of your games. I don't know how much Texas Tech can rely on scoring 12, 13, 14 runs a game, especially when they're not in Lubbock, if they want to get back to the success that Red Raider fans are used to their baseball team having.
I think when we're in Arlington, in what 11 days now, I don't know why I keep struggling with that number. It's been the same all day. We're going to be watching Texas Tech very closely because, like you said, they have the potential to be one team in a different ballpark compared to where they play all their home games. But the puzzle remains the same for Texas Tech. Can you win games 19-17 consistently? I would argue that no team in the country can do that. It feels like they have the offense to compete almost at the top of the league if you put average pitching together. But the question is, can they do that? This was the hardest team for me to put together. Maybe it's just because I don't know enough about Texas Tech, but their pitching to me feels like the ultimate gluing guys together and seeing what fits. And I don't know if it's going to fit. I think Ryan Free is a D2 pitcher that you hope that translates. Jackson Burns is a guy that I think, want to take the next step, but they also want 20 guys to take the next step on the mound, it feels like. But when we watch Texas Tech's offense against premier programs, we're going to learn a lot, I think, about what Texas Tech's potential actually is, because right now, for me, they're the hardest team to project in this league, and they've been like that for a few years now. You think back to when Texas Tech was at their peak, I don't remember their pitching even being that strong either. I remember Caleb Killian and guys like that where he was great for short stretches. I don't know what Texas Tech's recipe for success is and what the ceiling of the pitching staff looks like, but I'm excited about a guy like Hollis Porter coming in from Maryland who tore the cover off the ball last year for the Terps. And then a guy like Kyler Thompson who brings a lot of at-bats back. Tracer Lopez is a fun player. Kyler Thompson's a fun player. Connor Schaus from Georgia Tech is a 2A guy that's fun. I'm very intrigued to watch Texas Tech. At the same time, I'm also scared to watch Texas Tech.
Yeah, I mean, Porter's a guy that could probably hit 20, 22 home runs just in Lubbock this year. And that's going to be a blast to see. But I don't know how many baseball games that wins you when you have the question marks you have on this pitching staff. I mean, even the guys that they added, like you mentioned, Ryan Free from the D2 level, Casey Ranieri from Hawaii, like these are guys that had some production at their last stops, but weren't the most productive guys at their last stops. And so you wonder what the translation is going to be like getting into Big 12 play. I'm really curious about this ball club because I wonder how much longer Texas Tech will tolerate. I don't want to say mediocrity. I don't feel like that's fair necessarily, but they've passed their peak quite a bit, I think. And when you look at the rest of what Texas Tech athletics is doing, and then you compare that to what the baseball program is doing, there's going to be a little bit of disappointment there, and I just don't know how much longer they'll tolerate that. But they do have kind of their standard non-conference schedule here. They have the first weekend in Arlington against Vandy, Arkansas, and Oklahoma, but then they host Albany for 4 games, Cal State Bakersfield uh, for 3 games. They host Penn State, which is like, okay, it's a Big Ten program, but Penn State baseball is a lot different than its football program. Oh, maybe not. Uh, UTSA for a couple of midweek games. That'll be a really fun kind of litmus test for the Red Raiders. And then you get into Big 12 play where you're hosting Kansas, then you're heading to Arizona, then you're heading to TCU right out of the gate. And that's just a hard 9 games. Not to mention you're playing DBU in a midweek game in that stretch as well. And then you got Houston, and then you've got West Virginia. I mean, for those first 5 series in Big 12 play, I mean, you could be looking at, you know, I don't even, how many games is that? 15? You could be looking at being 5-10 coming out of those first 5 series. And that's just back against the wall at that point with road trips to Utah on the schedule. Got to go to Baylor. You host Oklahoma State, BYU, Cincinnati to close out the season. I mean, it could get pretty tough. I mean, that road series at Cincinnati to end the regular season, I don't know what Texas Tech Big 12 record looks like at that point, but I don't think it's going to get better necessarily playing the Bearcats when they're, theoretically kind of peaking and getting ready for postseason play. I just this is a hard situation for Texas Tech baseball right now because the Big 12 is getting better. Your program is not sustaining at the levels that it was when you were allowed to just get guys and develop them. I think that's one of the things that Tech was always really good at, was developing talent over the course of several years. And this state of college baseball now doesn't really allow you to do that unless you're also investing in the rev share and NIL necessary to keep those guys long enough to develop them. So I'm a little worried about Texas Tech baseball long term if they continue to kind of approach baseball the same way. And I don't think things are going to get much easier for them in 2026.
That was just the point I was about to make, was with revenue sharing. You have all these sports that are doing so well. Texas Tech in the college football playoff, and with the schedule they have next year, pencil them in for the playoff again. Texas Tech basketball has been really good the last 8 years or so. They went to the Final Four 7 years ago. They've been knocking on the door since a few times. I think they should have gone to the Final Four last year. And then women's basketball, I know as much about women's basketball as you do what I had for breakfast this morning, but I know that they picked up a big win over TCU last night.
Come on because now. They sure did.
It was on my screen as I was getting ready to watch Nebraska play Illinois. But I am also worried about Texas Tech. I know that the lifetime contract is kind of a fun thing to throw around every once in a while because you have Texas Tech and Bill Self and Tim Tadlock signed to lifetime contracts, and they're kind of going opposite directions. It's a dynamic that I think is interesting because it wasn't that long ago that Texas Tech was in Omaha every single year, along with TCU, and now they're struggling to project to compete in even the top half of the league.
Yeah, it's a tough situation out in Lubbock right now, and I'm curious how much longer people will put up with it. All right, moving right along. We're making time. I'll just say that. We're making time here. Let's move on to the next squad. 3 more to go. The UCF Knights. Another interesting ball club here. We're on the outside looking in when it came to tournament bids in 2025. This is a team that lost almost as much production at the plate as anybody else in the Big 12 last season, losing guys like Dom Castellano. That's a pitcher. Losing guys like Antonio Jimenez, Aiden Espinal, Dylan King, Andrew Sundin, like the list kind of Chase Cruson, the list goes on and on and on with the guys that they lost. But they also return a good amount of production at the plate. I thought they had a great portal season when it comes to their bats and a couple pitchers as well. But this is another one of those teams that maybe you're not necessarily going to expect them to compete for the Big 12 championship and get an NCAA tournament bid. But this is another team, as TCU fans can attest from last year, going to Orlando and losing 2 of 3. This is a team that can get you if you're not ready for them, and it feels like that's going to be the case for them again in 26.
Yeah, the narrative I had for UCF when I was writing about them in the Diamond Report was that they felt a lot better than they actually were. They looked really good. They were a scrappy team. It felt like they scored a lot of runs, and then they just found ways to lose baseball games. If you're a outsider listening in, they kind of remind me of a little bit of Ohio State. If you're looking at a Big Ten comp, except Ohio State was a little bit worse. Diamez Ross, Andrew Williamson, really exciting outfielders that come back. They were, I believe, both first team All Big 12 or second team All Big 12, high up in there last year, and enter with similar expectations this year, kind of anchoring a lineup that otherwise is built mostly on transfers that you hope that the stats carry over from guys like Stetson and Lamar, with Zach Skinner coming from Lamar, Landon Moran from Stetson, John Smith from South Alabama, and James Hankerson is a guy that you hope to tap into his potential from Florida State. The pitching for me is where you're going to define this team, because I think we saw him hit the ball really well last year, and like I just said, they were better than you think they were, and then the bullpen would kind of let them down. So where are they going to get that production from? I think that Roman Kimball is the guy that excites me quite a bit, because I remember him at South Carolina. He became a fan favorite a little bit because I don't know if he still does this, but he would kind of YouTube his week as a player and would post that. And then he's battled injuries throughout his career. I don't know what his role is going to be, whether it's midweek starter, bullpen guy, but he's somebody who's just been around college baseball, it feels like, forever. Cam Wicker is a fun idea. Grant Siegel, Matt Saucer, you hope kind of round out a rotation. There might be some hit or miss guys in there just based on the turnover of a team that didn't qualify for the Big 12 tournament last year. So I think there's a little bit of excitement for UCF because the talent's certainly there. They had the number 12 ranked, I believe, perfect game class coming in this year. So there's a bunch of freshmen that I haven't even really considered their roles that are chomping at the bit to live out to their potential. They had a few guys of that class go pro, but the bulk of it is on campus. I'm excited to see what they look like. I hope that they're able to find ways to win closer games. It feels like that if there's any program that came from the lower ranks the last few years to the Big 12, UCF has kind of struggled the most with that transition, outside of maybe Utah and BYU. But I think even Utah and BYU have found their niche a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just across the board, athletics wise, I think UCF is kind of in a weird spot
Yeah.
right now. Braden Smith is a guy that I'm really intrigued by as an arm for this ball club. He spent last year at D2, was their primary Friday starter. Let me look here. I've got the wrong page pulled up. Of course I do. Maryville kid, who was all conference first team, all region. Started 12 games, threw over 76 innings of baseball, finished with a 3.5 ERA, and struck out 79 guys. I'm curious to see how his stuff translates, because he could be a really important arm this this season for them. Curious to see kind of I'm just curious to see the product, really, truly. Right, this is a team that I know travels to Fort Worth this year, so I'll get to see them live then. But it's one of those situations where you like the coaching staff. You like the like you said, you thought they were a lot better than they actually were record wise last year. Now, how do they turn some of that, good vibes really into more production and into more wins? That'll be kind of the key, I think, for them in 2026. Looking at their schedule here, they do have their standard midweek games against Miami, Florida, Florida State, which are always very fun. I know they won quite a few of those last year, and maybe that's where some of this team is maybe feels better than their record would reflect. Maybe that's where some of that came from last year. They're in the Jacksonville College Baseball Classic. They'll play Notre Dame, Indiana, LSU, and Jacksonville, which will be really fun. That LSU game on Sunday, February 22nd, is going to be one to keep an eye on, I think, for sure. A weekend series against South Florida, Murray State, before they get into Big 12 play. They host Oklahoma State to open conference play before they travel to Fort Worth for a series against TCU. They get Arizona at home before they travel to West Virginia. They travel to Kansas the weekend after they travel to West Virginia, so that's probably arguably the hardest part of their schedule right there is the TCU, Arizona, West Virginia, Kansas in 4 consecutive weeks. That's pretty tough, but it doesn't get easier because they host Cincinnati the following weekend. Um, and then I guess you could call it a little bit of a reprieve by traveling to Utah, but then you're right back home against Arizona State, in Waco against Baylor, and home against Kansas State to wrap up the conference schedule there. I mean, that's a tough stretch of baseball there in the middle of April, pretty much all of April and early May, for a ball club that's trying to win a couple games and string something together here.
And I suppose by, again, looking at the quirks of a schedule, just knowing the grind of Big 12 play, geographically, this is always going to be the case for UCF, but it feels like they travel more miles than anybody because they have to. They don't have a nearby partner they can easily bus to in the Big 12. It's cross country flights. It feels like every road series going to West Virginia, then flying to Kansas, then returning home, then going all the way out to Utah while simultaneously having to play those teams is just not an ideal stretch for a college athlete. And I know that teams like UCLA athletics like to make a big deal about this new travel schedule, even though they're responsible for it. I think UCF has the benefit of playing in a higher league now because of realignment, but they're probably the ones who suffer the most just with the literal geography of this league.
Yeah, it's tough, right? And then you look at what the Big 12 did with the tournament this year, moving that out to surprise Arizona, and it's like, okay, UCF and Cincinnati and West Virginia, congratulations, you have 2 time zones to cross now just to play in your conference tournament. It's never a fun thing. But at the same time, like you said, they did sign up for this. There is a lot of money involved in why they signed up for this, but it doesn't make the games any easier for sure. Um, and I don't know. Uh, Maybe something for us to track this year is how successful are teams that are traveling more than one time zone to play an opponent, especially going East Coast to West. That feels like that time difference always hits a little bit harder. Um, Certainly did for TCU in the Corvallis Regional last year, I would say. But this is a situation where it does feel like the deck is a little bit stacked against UCF this year, and we'll probably see another year similar to 2025 because of it.
Yeah, and I don't know what the solution is. If we're going to say that the schedule is stacked against them and other factors as well with the Big 12 tournament being in Arizona, it's not like those things are temporary. That's the way that
Right.
life is at this point. So how do you deal with that as a program when you're not going to say out loud the Big 12 is conspiring against us or anything along those lines, especially when, again, you're lucky to be here. But at some point you have to weigh some costs and analysis of that.
You do. And speaking of cost analysis, that's why the tournament's moving out of Globe Life and going to Surprise is because the Big 12 is going to save about $1 million a year, and that's not chump change when it comes to a sport that doesn't always break even for leagues and for programs. So, but yeah, and it's going to be an interesting path to find a little bit more success for the UCF Knights, and frankly, it's a similar situation for the Utah Utes as well. I know they're breaking in a new baseball stadium this year. It's going to be much better, I think, for hitters across the board, both their own and visiting teams in their new ballpark this year. But this is a similar situation where they lost some really interesting talent. They bring back some top end talent as well, but I'm just not sure if all of the pieces are there for a tremendous amount of success. Now, I wouldn't be shocked to see Utah go from what they finished 10th in the league to, or 11th in the league to maybe like 9th, 8th. I think there's maybe a little bit of room for growth there. That also requires a couple other teams to take a step back. But I mean, I like some of the guys on this roster, right? Like Coulter McAnally's a really fun pitcher, top end talent in the league. Nevin Noonan is a guy that they brought in. Bradley Navarro's another kid that they brought in from the JUCO ranks who I think could be really successful for them. But I'm curious to know. I'm curious to see how it all plays out.
It's absolutely a puzzle for Gary Henderson, who has won at Mississippi State before with a puzzle piece to put together, but he's been at Utah for several years now, and you just wonder what the actual ceiling of this program is, at least for the next several years. But Coulter McNally is absolutely worth the price of admission on if you're playing on certain weeks Thursdays, but most weeks Fridays. Uh, Utah won 8 conference games last year. I would wager to guess that a vast majority of those occurred on Friday nights, or at least the opening night of a series with Coulter on the mound. I know that there were a lot of games that Utah were able to win maybe 2-1 on a Friday because of Coulter's brilliance. When you talk about the guys that the Big 12 were able to retain, if you consider that a conference effort, it's without knowing any details of the Utah program and what sort of financials are floating around, a minor miracle that Coulter is still in Salt Lake City, just based on the nature of college sports these days. You would think that guy would be making SEC money right now. No disrespect to the Tommy Laportes of the world, but I have him penciled in as the Big 12 Pitcher of the Year. I feel like the way he can be an MVP for Utah kind of gives him a few bonus points in an award type setting, kind of like you got that benefit of the doubt with Antoine John at Houston last year. I think that he's very exciting, but the rest of the team, you don't know. There's so much, not even potential, I don't think is the right word there. There's so many question marks, but a guy like Nevin Noonan is really exciting. Great stats coming in from San Diego State. Derek Smith and Cam Gurney are guys that have been around for a while. What do they look like? But again, I'm excited to watch Utah in person because I get to watch Coulter McNally pitch.
Yeah, and like you mentioned with Antoine John last year, dynamic arms don't always lead to the wins that you maybe want to have, especially on the days that they're not throwing. And so that's kind of where Utah's going to run into some of these issues. They do have, when you maybe don't have the biggest budget in the world, I think they brought in some really good talent from the JUCO level, and this is kind of a theme throughout the Big 12 at times, is recruiting the JUCO levels. But you look at guys like Caden Soder and Landon Salveson, who had huge years at JUCO level last year. If they can translate even 75% of that to Big 12 play, you're probably talking about a Utah team that has won a couple more games this year than last. But those are big, big, big ifs. Big ifs. And the schedule's not great either, frankly. I mean, they start with 4 games at Fresno State. They play UC San Diego in the midweek, and then they have a weekend against San Diego State, and Creighton. So, I mean, what's that? 6 games against tournament teams right out of the gate to start your season. You go to UC Santa Barbara. You play a midweek against Loyola Marymount. You play Grand Canyon in a 4-game series, and then you're into Big 12 play. People will look at that non-conference schedule and say, "Oh, I don't really recognize any of those names as probably a light non-con." That is a salty non-conference, especially for Utah. And then your Big 12 play opens with Arizona. Congratulations. And then you have to travel to Cincinnati. You get Kansas State at home. You travel to Kansas. You travel to Arizona. You get Texas Tech at home. I don't know how. I mean, those games might be 100 to 99 with the altitude and the way Texas Tech we're anticipating them being able to hit this year. Then you get UCF and BYU, so there's maybe a little bit of what we would call a lull in the schedule before you travel to TCU. You get Baylor to end the season. So just that first month and a half of the season really feels like it'll be make or break for Utah. If McAnally can get them through that, if they can find another arm or two in that stretch, it does lighten up a little bit on the back half of the schedule where they maybe can claw some wins back and salvage a decent record.
One of the arms that I might keep tabs on to develop, and it's another last name that I'm going to butcher, Ian Linus or Linnaeus, a freshman coming in, left-hander, highly touted. I think he's a guy that if you're going to go all in on developing arms along the Coulter path, he's a guy that might slide in and give you some length. But again, he's a freshman. You don't know what that role is going to look like. But if he develops, they're going to have a really exciting 1-2 punch potentially. But easier said than done at Utah.
Truly is. All right, we've been at this for an hour and a half now, so it's about damn time that we get to the West Virginia Mountaineers, who I know because you said episode 1 and you've been talking about on the internet for quite a while now. You are very high on, and rightfully so, because this is a team that I would put them in the same bucket as Kansas. I don't know if that's not totally fair as far as what they've accomplished to date, and then stacking the potential and the energy around the program on top of that. It feels like Kansas and West Virginia are on similar paths, similar trajectories as far as those things are concerned. But this is a team that uh, was very close last year to getting where they really wanted to go. They had some young talent step up in key situations late. Steve Saban's in year one, I thought did a phenomenal job of building the roster, of kind of sustaining the culture from Randy Mazie. And now in year two, he returns a good amount of the production on both the mound and at the plate. But where I think he really hit was in this portal and just some of the talent that he brought in, the places he went and found it. Uh, I think that West Virginia, it's not out of the realm of possibility for us to be sitting here in May talking about West Virginia being the back-to-back regular season Big 12 champs.
I 100% agree. And as you mentioned, my activity on, as you very youthfully called it, the internet, I have been saying that if Division two talent translate, which again, for the fifth time maybe tonight, easier said than done. If that happens in Morgantown, we're going to have maybe the best pitching staff in the league, and West Virginia will have the chance to play in Omaha. They've reached super regionals in two consecutive seasons, and last year they just ran into a buzzsaw that ended up being the eventual national champions at LSU. Nobody wins a super regional in Baton Rouge. It's not personal for West Virginia. I'm going to say that they went out there and they forfeited because they might as well have going into Baton Rouge. That's just how life goes. I understood for a minute why this team isn't getting more love because you look at some of the guys that they lost and you think, okay, I can understand why it's going to take a second to replace those guys offensively. And then, like you said, you look at the portal class and you think, you know what, these guys are getting disrespected again. I know that West Virginia fans will be very quick to tell you that some of the bigger names in the industry weren't ranking them as early as they could have been ranked, and some of that was non-conference scheduling. Last year was on the weaker side, and their wins just weren't overly impressive. As I recall, they kind of eased into Big 12 play. They didn't play many of the top dogs right away. I know that they played Arizona and kind of got snagged a little bit last year, I believe, if memory serves. And then you get swept by Kansas to end the year. So there were certainly opportunities to improve your resume to the guys that are trying to rank you, and they fell short a little bit. But the program's absolutely moving in the right direction, and I know there's a ton of excitement with the depth on this team. And for me, I get really excited about the pitching. I mentioned the D2 pitching, Dawson Montessa and Ian Korn. Again, you hope that D2 pitching projects like they did at that level. That's Montessa, who threw over 100 strikeouts last year at 805 or 805 at the D2 level. And then he's a junior. Ian Korn comes in as a grad transfer, very old guy, kind of like that Kansas mold you talked about. Chase Myers back. Where does he fit in the rotation? He was really strong last year. I'm kind of overly bullish on Dawson Montessa, so I almost am unfair to guys like Chase Meyer who return. I don't know. Maybe he's the Friday night guy. The reality is that you can have any of those guys pitch in any order if they deliver on their potential that they did at a lower level. Again, easier said than done. Reese Bassinger is another terrific arm. Chanson Cole is another D2 arm that they believe in, who may not even have a spot in the rotation right now. Chanson Cole threw 97 strikeouts last year at the D2 level. Just insane stats that you hope transfer over. And frankly, you can go 1 for 3, and you have a really strong staff. They're hoping to go 3 for 3, though, in support of this offense led by Gavin Kelly, Armani Guzman, Brody Kresser, all back from last year's team. Brody carved out a role in that middle infield, was really consistent. Armani, a little bit bigger bat, has some speed, 327 last year. And then Gavin Kelly's a guy that Steve Saban calls a superstar. If you look at just his stats, you maybe are like, yeah, I can see that he was okay in his freshman season last year. But when you watch Gavin play, he's so versatile. He's one of those guys that you talked about earlier. You can move him around because that's the athlete he is. He played a lot of catcher last year with some second base. From my understanding, and you'll see some others follow suit, he's going to be playing second base this year because you have Matthew Gravelin behind the plate from Ohio State, who is just a massive bat. Really enjoyed a strong career at Ohio State. Feels like it's a home run every time. He's got that kind of size to him. And most importantly, experience as he kind of trains this hopeful D2 to D1 pitching staff. And then some of the transfers that you alluded to with Sean Smith, Brock Wills, Matt Einig, guys that bring big numbers, and hopefully you can transfer that over. And again, you don't have to hit on all these guys to have a really, really good team. You just have to hit on one or two.
And if you hit on one or two or three, and then the other guys still give you above average production. I mean, not everybody on a team can be a superstar, but if those guys give you above average production, you're talking about a really, really deep West Virginia Mountaineers ball club. Sean Smith, interestingly enough, Georgia Southern transfer. That's who West Virginia opens up their season against this year. Is 3 games at Georgia Southern in Statesboro, Georgia. So a fun little homecoming for Sean Smith right out of the gate after hitting the portal and ending up at West Virginia. Liberty, Kennesaw State, and Radford are all on the non-conference schedule for West Virginia, as is Columbia. A fun, maybe sleeper, really fun weekend up in Morgantown between Columbia and West Virginia there before they get into Big 12 play, which starts, with Baylor and BYU, right? Kind of easing into things there a little bit. I know we both think very highly of Baylor, and obviously a road trip to Waco is going to be tough, but when you're in the position that West Virginia is in, you like the setup of this Big 12 schedule with Baylor and BYU out of the gate. A road trip to Arizona plus a midweek game a road trip to Arizona State and a midweek game against Arizona. Come back home for a series against Central Florida. Head to Lubbock where the Bats maybe can really thrive against Texas Tech. Houston at home, Cincinnati at Cincinnati, Kansas State at home, on the road at Kansas, home against TCU to close out the schedule there. That's going to be a very fun weekend series in Morgantown between the Frogs and the Mountaineers. I think we might have to make arrangements for that one. I'll say that, but that could very well be for the Big 12 regular season title if things break the way both those teams want.
Absolutely. It feels like West Virginia's schedule sets up exactly like it did last year, where you mentioned easing into Big 12 play, and then right at the end you're playing for the league. And last year West Virginia got swept to end the season, and they still won the league. That's how good the rest of their campaign was, and they benefited from that storm in Oklahoma State. Nobody else really did, but they did, and you're not going to get that again, nor does anybody want that to happen again. But it feels like this is a program that can really, really ease into the schedule. You mentioned that non-conference. There's nobody there that shivers my timbers per se. And then you start at Baylor, and I keep saying there are certain teams you want to get early and maybe don't want to see late. Baylor would be one that I would identify as one that you would rather get before they settle in. And then BYU is a program that you can kind of count on to be consistently under par. And then you go to Arizona State, where all you have to do is hit. Maybe their pitching hasn't set in yet. So I can absolutely see the path where West Virginia's maybe nationally getting some love right around the end of March Madness, which will be a nice time for the Big 12.
It really will be. And this is, I know we've just spent an hour and 40 minutes talking about the majority of the league, and my brain's a little fuzzy right now, but when you look at the way that the schedule breaks out for some of these teams and all of the good baseball that's going to be played in May, it is really setting up for the conference to put its best foot forward to the country, I think, in May, when you've got Kansas and Arizona playing, Kansas and West Virginia, TCU and West Virginia. TCU, I think, is hosting Arizona in late April, early May, right? Just some of your premier ball clubs are playing each other when the baseball matters the most, I think is really, really good for the conference. And so we're going to be able to get into the depths of the season and just say, man, the Big 12 is playing some great, great baseball right now. Hopefully that's the case, right? Hopefully things bear out the way we're anticipating, and that the Big 12 is taking another step in the right direction as a league. But yeah, I think that this is West Virginia has the opportunity to kind of write its own check here and say, everybody talks about TCU, everybody talks about Arizona, Oklahoma State is maybe being kind of the big names in the league, but West Virginia is here to make their name, kind of put their name among those.
Absolutely. Really you hope that Steve Sabins is only going to progress. It feels like he looks the part. You've seen maybe first-year head coaches enjoy success right away from the hangover of a previous administration with the team they inherited. It feels Sabins is different. He just has the part and the role lockdown of making it his own program. This isn't Randy Mazey's West Virginia anymore. This is Steve Saban's West Virginia. I think he did a really good job of taking it over, replacing a legendary head coach, and making it his own while continuing to win at the same time. And that's a trait that other head coaches across the country, I think, will look to as well with programs like Georgia Tech and Tennessee. I don't know if they're going to directly call up Steve Saban and say, how did you pull that off? But there's a little bit of a blueprint laid out.
There certainly is. There certainly is. I think that's going to do it for this extremely long podcast episode 2 of the Flyover League. We will be back next week talking a little bit about preseason awards and some predictions, talking about the teams that we think can win the league, can maybe even make it to Omaha, some of our favorite players that we think are going to have good seasons as well. But until then, Noah, this has been a pleasure once again. We will talk to all of y'all next time.